While walking along the road, Jesus saw a man who had been blind since birth. The disciples said,
"Teacher, who sinned? Who is responsible for this man's blindness? Did he commit this that merited this punishment? If not his sins, is it the sins of his parents?"
Neither. His blindness cannot be explained or traced to any particular person's sins. He is blind, so the deeds of God may be put on display. While it is daytime, he must do the works of one who sent me. But when the sun sets and the night falls, the work is impossible. Whenever I am in the world, I am the light of the world.
After he said these things, he spat on the ground, mixed saliva and dirt to form mud. Then he smeared it across the blind man's eyes.
Go, wash yourself in the pool of Siloam.
We don't meet a lot of people who are blind these days, not from birth anyway. But I think there are many who are spiritually blind, or at least spiritually hungry, seeking spiritual healing. But it's a real question whether the church can truly be a place of healing for those who need spiritual healing, who are maybe spiritually blind or have spiritual blind spots. So I think in many ways we become passé. People aren't connected to denominations like they used to be, and they don't like organized religion. I always say, the United Church is the most disorganized religion I know, so please feel free to come here, but it doesn't seem to do it for them. They aren't interested in church services without connection to their lives and their world. And it certainly doesn't help that some who call themselves Christian employ hateful rhetoric against people of other faiths or those from the LGBTQ community and others who are marginalized and vulnerable. The Christian reputation has been damaged for sure. Sometimes we want to blame it on the people. Well, they're not dedicated enough. They aren't interested in church. Their attention span is too short. They don't appreciate our music. These are all reasons why we think the people are not here. But maybe we need to look at ourselves a little closer. Maybe we're the ones who are spiritually blind. Because Jesus has only one thing to say when the disciples approach him and try to blame the man or his parents for his state. Who has sinned, they ask. Nobody has sinned, he says. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And this man's blindness for Jesus is an opportunity to bring light, to open eyes. And we, as the hands and feet of Christ in the world, we are the light. We're asked to open our eyes and see the blind people in front of us. And when we see those that we encounter who might not be interested in our church, as people seeking light and hope, who are looking for release from spiritual blindness, we can become the light to them. It doesn't matter if they sit in our chairs on Sunday morning or if they volunteer on one of our committees. We need to focus on being the light. We need to focus on healing. And I believe the rest will follow.
As the man went through the town, some people noticed him. They said, "Isn't this the man we see every day, sitting and begging in the streets?"
This is the same man.
No, this can't be him. But this fellow bears an uncanny resemblance to the blind man.
I am the same man. It's me.
How have your lifeless eyes been opened?
A man named Jesus approached me and made mud from the ground and applied it in my eyes. He then said to me, 'Go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam.' I went and washed, and suddenly I could see."
Where is this man who healed you?
"I don't know."
The townspeople brought the formerly blind beggar to appear before the Pharisees that same day, the day that Jesus healed him, which happened to be the Sabbath day. The Pharisees began questioning him, looking for some explanation for how he could now see.
"He smeared mud on my eyes, and I washed. Now I see."
God can't possibly be behind this man because he is breaking the rules of the Sabbath.
How can such a law-breaking scoundrel do something like this?
The Pharisees were at odds with one another about Jesus and could not agree whether his power came from God or from the devil.
What do you say about this man, about the fact he opened your eyes so you could see?
"I have no doubt this man is a prophet."
Some of the Jews suspected the whole situation was a charade, that this man was never blind. So they summoned the man's parents to testify about his condition. They said, "Is this man your son? Do you testify that he has been blind since birth? How therefore does he now see?"
We can tell you this much. He is our son, and he was born blind. But his new life is a complete mystery. We do not know the man who opened his eyes. Why don't you ask our son? He's old enough to speak for himself.
The man's parents were a bit evasive because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. It had been rumored that anyone who spoke of Jesus as the Anointed One would be expelled from the synagogue, so they deferred the thorny question to their son, and the Pharisees called on him a second time.
Give God the credit. He's the one who healed you. All glory belongs to God. We are persuaded this man you speak of is a sinner who defies God.
"If this man is a sinner, I don't know. I am not qualified to say. I only know one thing. I was blind, and now I see."
I'd just like to make a comment on John in particular, but the Gospels. One of them said this, I don't remember which one, they said the Jews said, right? And when John uses that term, the Jews, he means all the Jewish leadership. He does not mean the people. He uses the word the crowd to mean the people. And the reason I want to point that out is because particularly the Gospel of John was used historically in anti-Semitic ways to persecute Jewish people, because it says right in the Bible, the Jews, and not understanding that Jesus came and his conflict was the leadership of the Jewish people and not the Jewish people themselves. Has caused so much pain. So as we read the Gospels over time and you hear that, just translate in your mind, just know there is not this general feeling that Jewish people generally are the enemy of Jesus. That's not the case at all. So I saw this movie last year called Big Eyes, and it was the story of Margaret and Walter Keane. Oh, they were both artists, but Margaret was actually the real talent. And you might remember her paintings like this one, because she was responsible for the best-selling artwork in the 60s. You might even have had a print or two in your basement now collecting dust. In a way, it's a really sad story because Margaret painted these pictures that were haunting and beautiful and inspirational, and Walter was then responsible for selling them. And at some point in this venture, he started claiming that he was actually the painter. And when she confronted him, he told Margaret that the paintings sell better if the people think they're talking to the real artist. He told her he was doing this for the family. And it really paid off in some ways because they bought a dream home in a prestigious part of California. But because he wanted to keep it all a secret, in that home they made this studio where she was to do her paintings. She says she painted 16 hours a day. And nobody was supposed to know about this. Nobody was allowed to go into her work area, not even her daughter, who confronted her and said, I know you're painting. And she would say, no, I'm not painting. That's your father's painting. I just need time alone. Later, she said she felt like she was trapped in this. She was getting in deeper and deeper with no way out of the hole she'd created. She said it was a total nightmare. And then in 1965, they divorced and she moved to Hawaii. But she continued to paint, and he continued to take the credit, and he paid her for her paintings until a time came when she could do it no more. It was 1970, and she blurted out in a radio interview that she actually was the real artist. She said it was a wonderful release for her, and she was proud of herself for the first time in a long, long time. Eventually, 1986 actually, which is 16 years after she started saying she was the painter, she sued Walter. And the judge said, there's no way we can know who actually painted these unless you paint for me. And he ordered a paint-off in the courtroom to see who was telling the truth. And Walter said at the time, it's amazing how this happened. Oh, I have a sore shoulder and I can't lift the brush. But Margaret said she said she was so nervous, she dropped her brush, she picked it up, and she did her painting in 53 minutes. And she was awarded $4 million in damages, a sum that Walter never actually paid. I heard Margaret Keane on a CBC interview this past week. She said she forgave Walter long before she forgave herself. She says she nearly didn't ever forgive herself until after she saw that movie in 2014. She said, it was a very moving experience to see what I was going through. I realized the pressures that I had at the time. I did the best that I could. It's made me realize what is important is not money or fame. There's nothing more important in life than having a clean conscience with God. You can dull your conscience by constantly going against it, but you're never happy. After this was all done, her paintings changed. They went from the eyes that were sad to ones that were hopeful. Eyes are the window of the soul, she said, and I paint how I feel. Eyes were very important in the ancient world as well. So much so that the belief in the evil eye, we've all heard about the evil eye, it was very pervasive throughout that region. The basic belief of the evil eye was that certain people or animals or demons or gods could cast a spell on any object that they glanced at. And so someone with an evil eye could destroy everything in your life. It was believed that the eyes were the window to the heart and the physical channel of your desires and your emotions. And so a good eye belonged to an honorable and benevolent person, and the evil eye belonged to a malicious and hostile and envious person. Particular envy. Envy was the big thing for the people with the evil eye. So you can imagine with this focus on the eyes, and the eyes being sort of the way your emotions and your heart are displayed, the channel through which all of that gets out into the world. They thought of it coming out, not the eyes receiving light, but the eyes actually pushing light out. So blind people were assumed to be potential possessors of the evil eye just because they were blind. The evil eye associated with envy was because they were in this culture of haves and have-nots. And you could never gain anything in a world like that without someone else losing something. And so you can imagine the threat this man's healing was to the rest of the town, because if he is healed, I've lost something somewhere. And so in our reading today, we see all kinds of people who are compromising what they know to be true and good for the sake of appearances or because they're afraid. The townspeople are curious more than anything. They don't know how this man could go from being a blind beggar on the edges of the town to one who now sees. But as in most cultures, those who are more privileged are invested in the continued oppression of the marginalized. And so instead of rejoicing with this man and welcoming him, they immediately take him to the Pharisees because they know something must be up. Something is not right, and I'm afraid it's going to affect my position. And of course, the Pharisees hide behind their laws. Well, the man was healed on the Sabbath, so they refused to see God at work because it didn't fit their narrative. Jesus, the healer, was a law-breaking scoundrel. It's usually the case that those with power and influence are threatened by the one who speaks to them and shows them up, who can do what they can't do. And so then they decide to call the parents. And even though their son has been blind from birth, and they undoubtedly must be thrilled that he can see, they're afraid of losing their position in their community. And so they put it back on their son. And you did this so well, Bob. The crotchety parent is like, well, you did it so well is all I'm saying. I'm not saying it's typecasting. I don't know, but seemed to come from experience is all I'm saying. Anyway, no, he's a lovely man. I can say that for sure. So they put it on his son and they go, oh, well, he's old enough to answer for himself. Don't ask me. Imagine a miracle of this importance in your life, and you don't acknowledge it because you're afraid. And so between the townspeople and the Pharisees and even his parents, all of whom have in some way violated their conscience, have dulled themselves to the truth. They're standing with God. The blind man is then confronted with this question: who healed you? Say it was God, not this Jesus, the lawbreaker. And the man, blind from birth, he gives this simple answer: I don't know if he's a sinner. I only know one thing. I was blind, and now I see. And this is the beginning of a dawning realization that all the pressures of his life, of scrounging for food, of making his parents happy, of staying on the right side of these religious rulers, they hadn't been able to give him the thing he needed most because he was blind. But now he sees. And he knows that there is time to change. There is time to be different. There is time to start over. There is time to find home once again.
What did he do to you? How did he give you sight?
Listen, I've already answered all these questions, and you don't like my answers. Do you really need me to say it all over again? Are you thinking about joining up with him and becoming his followers?
You're one of his followers, but we follow Moses. We have confidence that God spoke to Moses, but this man you speak of is a mystery. We don't even know where he comes from.
Well, isn't it ironic that you, our religious leaders, don't even know where he comes from? Yet he gave me sight. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does respond and work through those who worship him and do his will. No one has ever heard of someone opening the eyes of a person blind from birth. This man must come from God. Otherwise, this miracle would not be possible. Only God can do such things.
You were born under a cloud of sin. How can you, of all people, lecture us?
The religious leaders banished him from their presence. Jesus heard what had happened and sought him out.
Do you believe in the Son of Man?
I want to believe. Lord, who is he?
You have seen his face with your own new eyes, and you are talking to him now.
Lord, I do believe.
The man bowed low to worship Jesus.
I have entered this world to announce a verdict that changes everything. Now those without sight may begin to see, and those who see may become blind.
Surely we are not blind, are we?
If you were blind, you would be without sin. Because you claim you can see, your sin is ever present.
I saw this video a few weeks ago on YouTube of this cheerleading squad that did this routine to this really great poem. And I was going to show that, but the sound was bad and there was people, you know, in the background cheering and stuff. And then I found the man who wrote it and a video of it, and I just wanted to show it to you. What are you afraid of?
I used to be afraid at night, afraid of the dark, afraid that just beyond the point my eyesight allowed me to see that there was something lurking, afraid that the darkness itself would somehow surround me and swallow me up, as if darkness were anything more than simply the absence of light. I used to be afraid of tomorrow, afraid that who I was would continually dictate who I am, and that who I would be might be someone who I didn't like very much at all, as if there was no such thing as being made new. I used to be afraid of opinions, afraid that though words would not break my bones, they certainly would shatter my dreams, as if I started doing this for the approval of many rather than the glory of one. I used to be afraid of failure, afraid of losing, afraid of falling, afraid of being wrong, creating busts and looking absolutely stupid, because who am I to think that I could ever actually make a difference? As if those setbacks were anything more than stepping stones on the path to success. I used to be afraid. Used to. But then I did a little research. And by that, I mean I researched and I researched and I researched over and over again. And through all my researching, I kept coming up with the same exact question. What room does fear have? What room does fear have when I cling to trust? What room does fear have when I lean on hope? What room does fear have when I search for something more, when I discover what's good, and when I stand in awe? When I run with perseverance, when I walk by faith, and when I rest in comfort? What room does fear have when I sing with praise, when I take hold of inspiration, explore the possibilities, and step into freedom? What room does fear have when I discover strength, embrace courage, remember peace, declare truth, choose joy, experience life, and conquer death? What room does fear have when I find perfection in the one place I never thought to look? In weakness, when I'm saved by the most unlikely of heroes, by grace, when I'm invited into a relationship more loving and intimate than I could ever imagine as a child of God. I'll ask you again, what room does fear have when I step out of the darkness and I bask in the light? When I let the past be the past and the future has no limit, when they can talk all they want, but their opinion doesn't matter, and when failure is nothing more and nothing less than the road by which I walk my path to success. I'll ask you one last time, what room does fear have when in His Word He tells me 365 times, depending on the translation, do not be afraid? As if I needed to hear that every single day. And as if that's how many times I needed to hear it before I finally believed it. What room does fear have when I make room for love? What are you afraid of?
So consider the simple testimony of this man born blind. I once was blind, but now I see. He wasn't concerned about how this appeared to his friends and his family and the church leadership. He wasn't caught up in the controversy surrounding who Jesus was and why he was here. It didn't matter for him that he properly identified from where this healing power came. I once was blind, but now I see, was all that mattered. And with these truths before us, that Jesus has come to be the light in the world, that we who were once blind and afraid have been healed, and now we see. So what do we have to be afraid of?